Many years ago, when I was in college, I lived with my brother off and on. The house had a downstairs with the living room, dining room, kitchen, and master bedroom, and an upstairs with the kids' room on one side, a bathroom on the other, and a bit of space in between in front of the stairs. It wasn't really big enough to be called a room, but it wasn't exactly a hallway. They set up a futon for me, and that became my area. I remember thinking that the upstairs felt a little off, especially my niece's room. After a few months, I started sleeping on the couch downstairs, partly because the kids would disturb me in the morning, but also because I never felt right up there. There were several strange things that happened while I lived there. One night, my brother, sister-in-law, niece, nephew, and I were at the table eating dinner. From upstairs, we heard one of my niece's talking dolls say something like, "I want to play with you." It sounds like horror movie cliche bullshit, I know, but it was extremely unsettling when it happened in real life. No one else was in the house, and they didn't have any pets. Another time, my niece was coming down the stairs when she suddenly fell. I remember thinking it was really strange because it didn't look like she tripped. It was more like she had been pushed. Her necklace had broken during the fall, but not at the clasp. The strings had just broken like someone yanked it off. Then, one night, while I was still sleeping upstairs, I woke up and felt really uneasy. I think it was around 2 or 3 in the morning. Since the kids' rooms were across from the bathroom, they had to walk through my area to get from one to the other. I opened my eyes and saw what looked like someone in a pink bathrobe go into the bathroom. I didn't recall my niece having a pink bathrobe, so I thought it was kind of strange. After a while, when no lights had switched on and I didn't hear the sink or the toilet flushing, I started to get up to go see if anyone was in there. But I got this really bad feeling that I should just leave it alone. In the morning, I asked my niece if she had a pink bathrobe, and I asked both my niece and nephew if either of them had gone to the bathroom in the middle of the night. They both said no. Sometime later, I mentioned the whole thing to my sister-in-law. She asked me if my brother had told me to say that. I was confused and said, "No, why?" She told me that when they had first moved in, she kept having this dream that there was a lady in a pink bathrobe sitting in the living room. They kept telling her to leave, but she wouldn't. Then one night, she dreamed that the lady was in the doorway of her room, screaming, and then flew at her and started choking her. A while after all this happened, my sister-in-law went around the house saying, "Okay, lady, I know you're here." Then she had the dream of moving in again, and this time they put the boxes all around her instead of telling her to leave. I moved out shortly after, but the incidents most likely stopped after that as far as I know. My sister-in-law said that they just had to learn to live with her.
Trigger warning: murder-suicide. This is going back about 10 years ago. I have shared this experience here and there, but have never dedicated a post in full detail. I should point out I seem to be a beacon for the paranormal and have had many experiences in my life. This house was by far the strangest. I live in a low socio-economic city, and the rental vacancy rate is usually 1% or lower. So when you need a rental, you kind of just pick a house you don't hate too much and hope for the best. I was living with my mum at the time, my brother, sister, and sister's son. I managed to find a private rental with a lovely couple. The house was at the good end of a bad street and was probably around 25 years old at the time. It was quite spacious and modern, and was the first house I'd ever rented with aircon. To give a visual idea of the home, it kind of has 2 fronts, which are both kind of also backs. One side backs onto the start of a highway and cane fields. The other side backs onto a quiet street and a park. The highway side has a fenced yard and a covered patio. The street side has an enclosed but open outdoor space, with another separate enclosed outdoor space that housed the landlord's spa, which we weren't allowed to use. This outdoor area was a large, kind of fancy garage that could house 2 cars. Inside that was a door to a tool shed, and inside that was a strange little creepy room that always gave me bad vibes. It had tools in it. I always tried not to go in there because it just felt too weird. Not long after we moved in, I constantly felt like I was being watched by a young girl who I always felt was around the spa garage area of the home. I never actually saw her, but it always felt like she was watching me. That was as strange as it got, until a poor little girl was murdered in my city. It seemed to trigger something in the home, I feel. One night I was in my bedroom and a statue on my shelf flew across the room at crazy speed and hit the wall. It somehow didn't break despite being quite delicate. Then one morning, my then boyfriend dropped me home around 2 a.m. It had been a hectic night studying at uni, so I got home pretty late. I opened the gate to the outdoor area. This is on the quiet side of the house. As the outdoor area wrapped around the house, I could see all the house lights were on in every room. It wasn't too strange a thing, as my mum and brother were total night owls at the time, and I figured they were both still awake. I put my hand on the doorknob to open it, pushed the door open, and the house was pitch black. When I investigated, my whole family was fast asleep in their rooms. There's just no way they could have magically turned off all the lights in that split second. I was so baffled that, after that, I made my boyfriend stay with me, as I went into my house every time he dropped me back late. The next experience was when I actually saw a shadow person in my room. I should add, I'd been having dreams about a teenage boy in kinda 80s looking clothing who kept talking to me about his mum in a rather distressed way. He kept showing me a 70s or 80s style sedan in the dream and a gravestone. It got so weird that I asked an old neighbour if there'd ever been a boy killed in a crash, as he always pointed to one particular road near the nearby cane fields. The neighbours said they didn't remember any such crash. I was again baffled. Enter the shadow dude, who I think was the boy. I woke up around 4 a.m. and it was only slightly light. I thought my brother was in my room, as I saw a thin male figure looking around my room as if he was looking for something or curious. I immediately said, "What are you looking for?" The figure turned around, kinda startled, and I could see it wasn't my brother, but a shadowy mass with no real features. He walked out of the room, but, and this was so creepy, he peeked his head around the doorframe once before he walked out towards the lounge room, which is the opposite side of my brother's room. Just to be sure, I checked my brother's room and he was fast asleep. Eventually, the house was sold and we had to move. This is where all the dots started to connect. I work at a paper and we have history books filled with snippets from old news stories. I read one snippet about an 80s murder-suicide in town between a mother and her young son and daughter. It was reported in the same suburb, but details were a bit vague, so I wondered if it was linked. Then I forgot all about it. Fast forward a while and I'm dating a different guy. At one stage, we were driving out near the cane fields in the general area of the house, and we both simultaneously said, "Do you feel that? It's like a bad energy." We pulled over for a moment, and then he said he needed to get out of there, and I agreed. I have no idea why my partner at the time was involved in these experiences, but at one stage, he was looking for a share house, and he told me he'd seen this one place that had such bad energy he couldn't stand being there. I asked him details, and eventually, we found out it was the exact house I had been living in. I hadn't even told him about my time there, so there's no way he'd have known. So one day, I go looking through microfilm at the library, searching for old history news as we often do flashback stories. I came by the story of the murder-suicide. Turns out, it was 2 doors down from where I lived. The mother is believed to have killed or drugged the children, loaded them into the car, then headed out towards the cane fields where she carried it out. The car in the photo was the exact one the boy had shown me, and the place it was found was in the direction he'd pointed. Their house had been in the same direction that I kept feeling the young girl around. I don't know if they visited the house I lived in. There's every chance they knew the owners at one time and had spent time there. Or perhaps 2 doors down isn't that far in terms of the spirit world. I did drive back past after I found out to tell the 2 kids I was sorry for what had happened to them. It also explained why the activity happened after another child was senselessly murdered. I think it upset them to think it had happened to someone else. I've noticed the home seems to change hands a lot, so I'm not sure if everyone there gets haunted or if it's just coincidence. I don't like to tell this story very often as it still gives me the creeps, but it's just so strange.
I've had many encounters with the paranormal over my lifetime, and this is one that stands out. Over a year ago, me and a friend had decided that we were going to do some urban exploring. Before we set out to find places to explore, we stopped and got some disposable vapes. Now that we had full stomachs and fresh nicotine, we were ready to explore. We had gone to 2 places. The first place was just some old abandoned school in a really small town. We found some cool stuff, but nothing too exciting. The second place we had gone to used to be where they printed newspapers. It wasn't a huge building, fairly small. Again, this was another small old town. We had entered through the front door with ease. We began exploring the building, hoping to find us some old newspapers to keep as souvenirs. My friend was looking at a book he had found and began to hit his nightstick. He was showing me a page that had a phone number written in it. We talked about calling the number to see if anyone would answer. While we were talking, my friend's nightstick looked like it was ripped from his hands, and from the look of his face, it was. He said, "What the hell?" After which, a large blind on the window closed. It was a large piece of metal and swung shut like the windows of a fireworks stand, and the sound scared the hell out of us. We began running, and when we left the room we were in, the door shut behind us, forcefully. We ran out through the front door like we had entered, and I swear to this day that this happened. Both of our bikes were slowly riding away from us, then stopped and fell over. I couldn't even catch my breath.
I wonder if there are any head-scratching missing cases at highway rest stops in the middle of nowhere or the middle of the wilderness that fit missing 411 criteria. I'm writing this because I was a stupid teen at the time of this experience, and now I'd like to know what rest stop this was. In August 2003, our road trip with a van to Marion Day in Carthage, Missouri, started from Parma, Ohio in the afternoon. Around 3 a.m., as my dad was pulling into a rest stop to nap, I heard 2 or more children giggling and laughing like they were playing and running around, which I thought was unusual. So I opened my eyes to look out the windows. I didn't spot the kids, but I did spot a 40 to 50-year-old woman pacing around the bench like she had gone crazy. I decided to go back to napping, yet I continued to hear giggling and laughing, which went on for a bit until we all decided to go to the restroom before going into a long sleep. I went straight to the restroom as I had to pee. When I was outside again, I noticed this rest stop is huge with very tall trees, a trail path to explore this rest stop area, like a park. Deep darkness. It looked like a national park. The woman is still looking crazy as I got back into the van. My parents heard that this rest stop is haunted. we noticed our vehicle needed a jump start. Soon the police came to talk to the crazy-looking woman. Words pass along that the woman has been looking for her 2 kids for the past 2 hours, so she had a good reason to go crazy. This surprises me because I was hearing kids giggling and laughing. I asked if anyone else in the van heard the kids laughing and giggling, and they all said no. Now that giggling and laughing doesn't make sense to me, as why didn't I hear any footsteps or any words or names? I assume the kids are dead at this point. Stuck in the back seat, I did not bother to talk to the cop. After a long nap, the sun was rising and we used the restroom again. I took the chance to look at the terrain beyond the tree line and parking lot to wonder how the kids could have gone missing. The terrain was dangerous, steep slope down the valley, boulders and river. Our van needed a jump start before heading out. We all agreed this rest stop was haunted. I wonder about people that can hear and see spirits. What do they hear and see in the wilderness?
This happened several years ago. I was 9 at the time, and I don't remember all the tiny little details, but I remember what happened. A quick thing to note is that I do not and have not ever been easily scared. I love creepy stories and have for a long time. My dad is from Kentucky, and sometimes we go up and visit his family and friends for a week or 2 over the summer. On this particular trip, we spent several days with a close friend of his. Previously to this trip, the friend's wife had an uncle pass away. He had fought in the Vietnam War, and after coming home had been a recluse. He lived in a house on the property that wasn't too far from the house, but was far enough that you couldn't see it. Well, since the uncle had passed away, they had to clean this house out. While talking about cleaning the house out, the boys and the wife all said that the house was super creepy. My dad's friend denied it and said they were being silly. It was too late because someone had mentioned a creepy thing and I was absolutely going to see it. So on the second night of staying with them, my dad, my brother, dad's friend, the friend's son, and I all went to the house. It was probably around 9 or 10 at the time and was very dark. We got up to the house and I was super excited. As I said, I love creepy stuff. Anyways, we go inside and immediately I know something is wrong. I get this awful feeling. I want to run and get as far away from that place as possible. I told my dad, but the house was old and fascinating and he didn't want to leave. I started to cry, saying we needed to get out of that house. No one listened to me. My dad convinced me to walk through the rest of the house. All the while, I am terribly creeped out. Anyways, I start to calm down and then we decide it's time to go upstairs. We get upstairs and I'm making jokes, trying to calm my nerves. We walked into a room and there are all these Native American artifacts, arrowheads and stuff like that. Anyways, we're looking around the room and the friend shows us a plastic Dollar General bag. And inside of the bag is a human skull. Immediately, my dad decides it's time to get out of there. We leave the house and we don't really talk about it again. Years later, my dad and I did talk about it again. He said that as soon as he'd seen that skull, he knew we needed to leave. Both my dad and I strongly believe in not messing with Native American burial ground stuff. However, while this all creeps me out, the thing that scares me the most is something my dad brought up. He and his friend's wife had discussed the Native American artifacts and the skull. The wife said she was creeped out by it, and my dad advised her to do something about the stuff. They didn't really do anything. A year later, the wife passed away. She started getting sick right around when they had looked through the house. It could be a coincidence, but I'm not sure. All I know is that there was something seriously wrong with that house. Every time I've been near that house since I first went in, I've felt like I'm being watched. So, I just want to start by saying, I never tell anyone this story as it reveals a past about myself I do not want to acknowledge or think about. I was young and stupid. However, I think it would be beneficial for me to put it out there in writing. I was raised in a family that never once dismissed the paranormal. In fact, we all kind of reveled in it. I mean, hell, I remember at 8 years old, my freaking grandma bought me my first ever ghost book called The Everything Ghost Book. So, needless to say, I was pretty much always a weird kid. My family had always been superstitious, and even sensitive to a point. My mom would say things like, "I have a feeling I'm going to see this person today." And like clockwork, she would run into them somehow. My first real experience started 10 years ago when I was 16 years old. My mom had found a cheap foreclosed house in a ridiculously small town called Ponce de Leon in Missouri, or as I like to call it, Misery. Naturally, she fell in love with the house. My mom, my older sister, and I moved in not long after. I was homeschooled at this time, and I was not happy about moving to such a small rural area. When I say small, I mean I could literally walk to the town post office right around the corner, as well as the town church. Not to mention you had to drive up a few hills to even get cell reception. Although I didn't share my mom's excitement about the move, the quaint town was kind of beautiful. It had a strange little cemetery and many natural springs and waterfalls, as the town name suggests. We soon realized after moving in that the neighbors were pretty close-knit. Upon conversation with one of them, my mom found out a few things about the house. It was built in the 1950s, and in the 1980s they started an add-on, and it was turned into the Baptist preacher's parsonage, or a church house provided for a member of the clergy. This is the same preacher that spoke at the church right up the road. It was later sold to the prior buyers, then foreclosed, and that's when we got it. Nothing more was said of what happened to the preacher. Now, pretty much immediately after we moved in, we started to update the house. We did flooring, painting, and all things that come with buying an older house. We didn't experience anything unusual during that time. After we'd gotten settled in and all renovations ceased, I invited my friend over to show her the new house. This is when my first experience happened. I started showing her around the kitchen, living room, bathrooms, etc. first, because I was saving my bedroom for last. As soon as I started to push my bedroom door open, we heard an object scrape across the tile of my bedroom directly towards us. I looked all around, and that's when I saw a little LED booklight by my feet. It's important to note that I strictly remember wedging that booklight between two heavy books on my bookshelf the night before, and that bookshelf was at least 12 feet from my bedroom door. I remember my friend's face looking tense and uneasy as I tried to explain. I even marched over to my bookshelf and tried to understand the logistics of how it happened, or how it could have happened. Truthfully, there was no way I could explain it. And frankly, the fact that it was thrown in my direction specifically made me feel anxious. That event seemed to be the catalyst. Strange things started happening to not only me, but my family as well. When we started opening up about the whole ordeal as a family, all three of us started to realize we had all shared the same experiences. One we all heard when walking down the same hallway was a man's deep voice saying "hey" in a rushed, loud tone. Anyone who has heard any kind of voice phenomena knows that it's so strange because it sounds as though it's directly in your ear canal. It's unlike anything else. Another common occurrence we shared was in the bathroom at night. When we had to wake up and pee, we all recounted hearing heavy footsteps, almost like a man in boots approaching the closed bathroom door. The steps would stop right outside the bathroom door, and you could bend down and see the shadow of feet underneath the door. Then they would walk away. We also frequently heard the front door opening, only to find it was fully closed. At one point, my mom, being sensitive as I mentioned earlier, was lying in her bed at night, just about to drift off, when she had a strange feeling come over her. She got the image in her head of an older male. She mentioned he had an angry face, and you could just feel his feeling of anger and hostility. I think she came to the assumption it could have possibly been the preacher, though we have no proof of this. If it was him, I can certainly tell you he did not like me one bit. This is where my story and experiences turn a little darker. We had lived in the house for about a year or so now, and summer started to come around. I decided I wanted my own space and moved out to the separated garage space. It was a huge space that we never kept the cars in anyways. I remember completely making the space my own. I bought huge curtains, painted the cement walls, got a mini fridge, brought in a TV, a PS2, and most importantly, all my music equipment. I have always been a music lover and devoted a lot of my time to playing electric guitar in my early teens. This is something that's always followed me. Right about this time is when I found my love for classic rock, but what really intrigued me was its dark history. It had gotten to a point where my mom and sister barely saw me in the house anymore. I had become a hermit in the garage, playing music and delving deep into research on my laptop. One figure in classic rock I was particularly engaged in was Jimmy Page of Led Zeppelin. According to a lot of books and articles, he was into the occult and followed English occultist Aleister Crowley. I often found myself falling down a rabbit hole, and I started to feel so disconnected from reality. It was then when I became obsessed with that old idea. You know, the whole sell your soul to the devil and shred like a madman on guitar. And one time while practicing, I believe someone or something gave me a taste of what it would feel like. There was one solo in particular I had tried to play a few times but could never quite hammer down. I had started to practice it again one day and started playing most of all the fast-paced solo perfectly. I all but ripped my guitar strap trying to get my guitar off. It terrified me. Unfortunately, it wasn't enough for me to stop my isolation and research, though I didn't touch my guitar for a while. My friends that I had back then were very like-minded, all very interested in the paranormal, occult, and otherworldly things. My garage started to be a safe place for all the friends I had, and there were plenty of long nights partying and partaking in things no mom would be proud of. But we were rebellious, defiant teenagers. None of us cared at the time. It was around this point I remember almost dreading going into the house when I had to inevitably take a shower or use the bathroom. In a sense, I didn't feel particularly welcome there either. I remember taking a shower one day, listening to Black Sabbath on a nearby iPad. The music kept pausing, so I would reach out and press play again. This happened about 3 or more times when I finally yelled, "I know it's you, stop doing that." And it didn't happen again for the remainder of my shower. It could have been a coincidence or a technical fault for sure, but I remember being so bold towards what I thought was that old preacher man, almost feeling a hatred towards him. One morning, when I was still sleeping in the garage, my mom busted through the door and started to throw all my things around. She was screaming, "I don't know what the F is going on in here, but something's got to change. Something's not right." Her voice sounded angry, but I could hear the undertones of fear. Keep in mind, it's not like I had a huge pentagram spray painted on the exterior of the garage. As far as I knew, she had no clue of what I was looking into and what I had been experiencing. It was the intuition of a loving and concerned mother, I guess. She proceeded to rip down my posters and grabbed random items of mine and threw them outside the garage door onto the lawn. I remember this like it was yesterday because I think it finally hit me how far things had gone. And seeing my mom so upset and ultimately scared, I think knocked some sense into me. It was then that I also moved back into the house, as it was turning to fall and started to become too cold to stay in the garage overnight anyways. Ultimately, I purged anything I had that truly had any dark personal significance to me during my move back into the house. The last thing that happened, and probably the worst of all, happened to my sister. The only way I heard her story was by listening to her explaining it to my mom. Even though I was completely moved into the house now, my family still kept their distance. I knew they felt something too. I felt as if I really divided my family. My sister had a job that required her to get up early in the morning when it was still dark outside. She was smoking a cigarette on the back porch, which has a direct view of the garage and the steep hill that runs alongside it. She said she saw a dark mass low to the ground. She first spotted it come from behind the back of the garage. It then started to charge down the steep hill towards the back porch where she was standing. She expressed to my mom she had never felt so much fear in her life, and she quickly shut the back door. She also said she didn't believe it was an animal because as it was charging towards her, there was absolutely no sound. No paws, hooves, or sound of feet on the soft ground. The house seemed to go quiet after that, no voices or footsteps. Unfortunately, a few years later, my mom could no longer keep up during a harsh winter. Everything started to break, and we didn't have the money to repair things. We couldn't even keep the house warm. We decided to up and leave. Most of our belongings were still in the house when we did leave. We came back a few times on warmer days to grab some more of our things, and I started to see our old home become a complete state of disrepair, mold growing absolutely everywhere, paint starting to peel, and all the hard work we had put into it gone. It was harder for my mom to see it. It was the first house she had bought, and it killed her to just abandon it. It eventually went back into foreclosure. When I turned 20, I got my first apartment that had to be blessed twice. I thought everything had gone back to normal at that point. I then met my now husband when I was still in my first apartment. He had no idea of my dark past, and admitted to me that he felt something dark in my apartment. One night, it got so bad, he said he had to pray over me. I've had 2 apartments since then, and we both don't sense anything inherently dark. Sometimes I still wonder if it's truly left. I got in contact with a good friend who distanced herself from me during that dark time. I would actually consider her my closest friend. She recounts things very differently and said that I had definitely changed. She has a few stories of her own and things that I had said to her that were very unlike my true character. The crazy thing is, I don't remember saying some of those things. I truly don't think I knew how bad it had gotten